Welcome to the Health Coach Nation podcast. My name is Hailey Rowe. I'm a sales and marketing coach and strategist for health coaches, life coaches, and wellness professionals who want to become a leader in their field by building their online community, rocking their sales process, and finally feeling confident about how they promote themselves and their marketing. On this show, we talk about tips to grow your business, save yourself time, and finally be able to create a sustainable, profitable business. Let's get into it. Today's podcast is brought to you by the Zero to Hero Coach Program. This is my 4-month program teaching coaches and online service providers how to grow your online business, book clients consistently, overcome your sales fears, and finally rock your social media visibility. If you struggle to create a sustainable coaching business, this program is for you. Check out HaileyRowe.com and book your free strategy call with my team or myself today. Thank you. Hey there, today I am here with Omar Cumberbatch, and we are going to be talking about how he grew his brand and his podcast. And he happens to talk with a lot of health coaches, a lot of people in the wellness industry. So this is perfect for the Health Coach Nation podcast, where we talk to life coaches, health coaches, mindset coaches, that kind of thing. And Omar, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, your podcast, and then we'll get into today's show.
Sure. Thanks for having me. It's really a pleasure. I have actually 2 podcasts. So I'm a real big fan of just the podcast space and just the ability that it could get your message out and really connect with the audiences that you really want to get in front of. So it was definitely a great marketing tool for me. I became a health coach because I had my own fitness journey. I was one of those people who I go to the gym every day. I do everything that was told to me basically by like mainstream media, mainstream magazines and whatnot. And I was not getting the results for the type of work that I was putting in. I mean, I would be in the gym, say, an hour and a half a day, lifting weights, running, and I just should have gotten way better results. It just wasn't working. And the truth is that I'm a stubborn person, and I just kept consistently just beating it into the ground and just saying, okay, you know what, maybe I have to be in there 2 hours. Maybe I have to run, instead of 3 miles, I have to do 4 miles. So I just had that work ethic to just figure out eventually just bust through a plateau. And then I stumbled upon a YouTube video with who eventually became my mentor and basically my hero, a guy named Sean Crocker, who used to do underground wellness about 7 or 8 years ago. He basically had like this YouTube video about sugar, and it really fascinated me. And again, I did so many things just to get to where I wanted to be physically and mentally that it wasn't working. I said, you know what, well, let me try this. Long story short, it worked tremendously, but just eliminated sugar out of my diet. I became so fascinated by the fact that one change, it's small but difficult. I mean, everybody knows in your audience, the detriments of sugar has such a profound effect. So that just gave me like this passion to go out there and say, hey, you know what, if I can do this one thing, let me learn about more. And then I kind of stumbled upon IIN, which is the Institute for Integrative Nutrition. I signed up, and that's how I became a health coach. And I kind of mirrored what Sean was doing. It was something that, like, he had a podcast, he was able to monetize it, become very successful and well-known in his space. And I just said, that's what I want to do. And it's been grinding in that direction ever since. And I'm doing about podcasting for like 6 years now.
Wow. I love that. That's awesome. So you've had a podcast now for 6 years, which is a huge accomplishment and requires a lot of consistency. So tell us a little bit, clearly you had a mentor who changed your life and you got to see some positive results and you wanted to share that on a podcast. But it's not as simple as just saying, all right, I'm going to share my experience and here we go. So what were some of the first steps you took when it comes to picking your podcast title, picking who it's for, like developing the messaging and the plan for that?
Well, I wish I could say it was a linear path, because it totally wasn't. I had to do a number of reboots, a number of failures. I am like, I guess, the epitome of that formula: suck, suck, success kind of thing, because I had just no kind of idea until I got a little bit of help. Like I said, I eventually needed a mentor in Sean to kind of get me into that space where I kind of came down and really niched down to the point where I really understood what was going on. So my initial title for my thing, I thought it was great. It was called The Wellness Ultimatum. So I thought people were just going to listen to it because of the title. I thought I was going to get this specific target market of men, and it just never panned out that way. I did get a lot of downloads, but I kind of was all over the place because the way that I looked at wellness at the time, and I still do, I don't want to discredit my idea of what wellness is. I thought wellness had to apply to everything, so I think you need to be financially well, mentally well, physically well, spiritually well. And I was taking components of all those things and putting them into a show. So I would get traction, but I would never get a true following. And the reason it was because I was all over the place. So people tend to look for specific things. And if they expect you to keep presenting those things, they'll stick with you knowing what you're going to get. Just like on this show, your audience knows what they're going to get. They're going to get a lot of advice on how to succeed in the wellness space as far as the business owner is going, and mindset and stuff that will move them in that direction. So you'll never let them down as far as that goes, because that's what you present. So at that time, I just didn't have that understanding. And it wasn't until I got some mentorship where a person would say, yeah, what if, you have all these broad topics from dating to really to physical fitness. It's like, what if Match.com, and this was at the time Match was that thing, I'm sure it's changed a whole lot. It's like, what if they heard you and wanted to be a sponsor for you? And they said, wow, this is a really great show. I want this person to present our product. And then the next show you hear something that has to do with weightlifting. They're going to take a pause and say, I'm not going to really mess with you because I thought you were about this, and this is where my audience lies. So it was one of those things where at that point I had to kind of figure out, okay, where do I want to go with this? And the truth is, Health Coach Academy, which is the name of my podcast, really started out of two reasons. One was definitely a selfish reason, because I needed some guidance on the business end of entrepreneurship in the wellness space. So I wanted to pick people's brains who have succeeded in that space, like yourself. And, at the time it was Sean Croxton and Reed Davis. These guys were guys on my show who were really telling me the business component that I needed. But I also knew that was a big audience of wellness entrepreneurs who had difficulty getting off the ground. So that's how I kind of came back and put it all into a definitely more of a niche down market. And then again, I had the consistency of just throwing it out there every week. And that was basically how it just eventually caused traction. And that was how I basically do most of my marketing for my business now.
Nice. So a lot of little things I wanted to point out in what you just mentioned. So the first thing is, it really does depend on what are your reasons and goals for starting a podcast. Because if your goal was just to make this a fun hobby and pick people's brains, and that alone was it, then you could technically have a podcast that covers weightlifting in one episode and another thing in another episode, and you're just having fun with it. But if your goal is to either, number one, monetize it through affiliate marketing, number two, monetize it through sponsorships, number three, market a program or product of your own through your podcast, or number four, build like a tribe or community with a common theme or interest, then you do want to get more specific. And so I like how you turned something that you were facing as an obstacle and it into an opportunity. And I did the same thing with my podcast. I really wanted to get to know more people in my industry. I wanted to get to have an excuse to talk to them. And starting a podcast was really useful for that. And for me, my goal is not necessarily, I want to get sponsorships or whatever, but I do want it to bring awareness to my community, Health Coach Nation on Facebook, and my coaching and my marketing services and that kind of thing. So it's been a great avenue for providing value and getting known in my niche or industry. And so that's my kind of summary of why I started a podcast. So I'd love to hear a little bit about when you started to build up the episodes. What were some of the steps you had to take to be able to do you monetize your podcast, and how long did that take? Like, tell us a little bit about what you need to think about if that's your goal.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you hit it on the head right away, where it's like, you do have to figure out if that is your purpose and that's what you want to do. So if you are intending on doing that, again, like putting yourself in that mind frame to say, okay, these are the kind of people who I really want to target. So in other words, affiliate marketing is my main way of getting revenue through the podcast. And that means that the guests who I present on the show have something to offer that they can give me an affiliate commission if any of my people do sign up with them. So it could be something like if the guest has a course, the guest has a supplement that they do, or anything that they're really selling, that you get a percentage of anything that you actually sell, which is very good. But again, like, unless that person is a fit and is going to be presented in front of the proper audience, it's not going to be a fit for either one. So obviously, the more listeners and downloads that you get, the more opportunities it is to make a decent amount off the people who you end up influencing to buy a product of one of your guests. But it also has to be in alignment with your community. So again, like in that example of Match.com, if Match.com has some kind of affiliate program, and I was talking about the New York Knicks, it's not gonna work. So it took a little time to get that off the ground, but it doesn't really need to be something you have a bazillion downloads or anything like that. As long as you have a good amount of followers and a tribe that really benefits from the recognition that you've been presenting them with, the value that you give on every podcast, it doesn't really have to be that bad. And again, when you do get into some of the higher ticket items as far as like affiliates, sometimes the return on that commission is really significant, and then it's just really about a numbers game. So even if you had 1,000 downloads a month or like 1,000 people who actually listen to per episode, I should say, even if you're doing a couple of 5% of that, you're pretty much doing very well on a program if you're getting a commission of say $500 per sale. So it's definitely an avenue that you would be able to take advantage of.
Love that. Yes. And I think one thing I want to point out is that people are going to say, well, Joe Rogan or the Goop podcast, if there even is a Goop podcast, those are really broad and they talk about all different topics and they talk to all different people. But I think people have to remember that that's fine. It's just a harder route. You have to have huge numbers, and it's a numbers game for your sponsors or for people to really be like, yeah, this is a great thing for us to pay this person to be a sponsor or something like that. So if you want the easy route, niche down. And if you want to stand out, niche down. If you want to compete with Joe Rogan and Oprah and, all those people with probably millions and millions of downloads, okay, but that's going to be a little trickier. And it's not to say also that you can't expand as you grow. Because, for example, I probably the first year and a half of my podcast just had, health coaches, people like that. And now I'm meeting more life coaches and other types of coaches who I work with and who listen to my podcast. So one of the other things I wanted to ask you is when you say, yeah, you have to start to, get the numbers up, because the conversions for affiliate products is going to be about a numbers game. How do you track, if you have any ideas, how do you track how many downloads? Because podcasts, the tricky thing about it is you can never really know who is listening and see their faces and talk to them directly. So I've always had this, I use, I think a site called Chartable or something like that to look at my downloads, but it's so tricky because I want to know, and I'd love to hear how you track your downloads and listeners.
Sure. So I use one of the podcast distribution companies called Libsyn, and Libsyn is the host of my podcast. So what happens is when I upload something to Libsyn, it distributes it through to iTunes, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Spotify, all that. So in the body of that, there's a place where you can check your statistics. And to your point, I'm actually pretty surprised that they don't get real specific about demographics. They'll tell you who's listening to as far as what countries you're and in your actual hardcore statistics of downloads. But I would figure that in this day and age, it could probably be a lot bit of more capable of tracking it down to like what the demographic of the person, male, female, and it doesn't do that. So it is really on Libsyn in their back end pages that I'm able to check the statistics. I also subscribe to Chartable, but it doesn't. It just kind of shows where you are ranking as opposed to how many people you're actually getting to download. So that's the way I do it. I don't think it's necessarily service provider. I think a lot of them are, especially if you hire one of those kinds of services for distribution, they do provide that. So that's how I get my statistics.
Yes, and I should add, I do use Anchor for mine. And Anchor does say the downloads, but it is just, it's interesting because I think that I wish I could just know more about the listeners, right?
Yeah.
But tell me a little bit about how did you build up your downloads when you're a new podcaster, and where does somebody start when they're really starting from ground zero?
I think that I was definitely fortunate for the fact that I was able to actually, because again, I had to reboot. So what happened is over the course of time, you do have some guests and that's one of the other benefits of having a podcast is that you do have a lot of off the air conversations with your guests that obviously we've had conversations off there. So we do have like a little bit of a connection. So when I rebooted, I was able to get a couple of the guests who were actually really big from my previous show to kind of come on and help me relaunch. And it really was one of the things that you do want a guest who actually helps promote your show, which is just as simple as just shooting it to their email list or to their social media handles and stuff like that, just so that you can kind of be relevant in their world and you kind of steal a couple of their people, a part of their tribe. So I definitely was able to do that, and I always try to get them to do their best, or I said an unofficial promise to promote, and again, we're not saying that you're going to have to do a Facebook ad for my show, and just please share it with your people and just kind of reiterate that. I also always ask for like a weight rating and or review on iTunes so that my ratings do increase so that people see that I've had some traction and I have a nice amount of ratings and reviews, and people kind of go through that and they do that as well. I think what happens is too, after time, where people who are in this space, they start seeing your associations with people, and then they kind of say, oh, well, if Omar's on Hailey's show or Hailey's on Omar's show, they must, they must be somebody, So you kind of steal some of their authorship, and that's helped me gain credibility over time, and was able to help me gain listeners along the way. So that's really like definitely the most organic way to do it. You obviously can pay for any amount of ads or anything that you want, but that's really like the biggest organic way that I would do. And guess just being on other people's podcasts as well, and just introducing myself to a new audience, it's also been the most inexpensive way to expand like at least the listenership. So, and yeah. I think one of the things too, just like you have Health Coach Nation, have Health Coach Academy. If you're health coaches, you're probably going to want to see what we're talking about. It's like, as long as you're interested. So the title does kind of help when it comes to doing that kind of thing, especially if you're niched appropriately.
Right. So sorry about that. So making sure that, number one, the title has buzzwords that your ideal client might be searching on iTunes or on Spotify, things like that. Like, so for me, Health Coach Nation, you, Health Coach Academy, and also making sure your guests are going to promote the show, and maybe you have a podcast form that they fill out, and maybe there's a part where they check off, yeah, I'll share it with my email list or my Instagram or whatever, and you can help them to share it with others by providing them with some photos or a clip from the show, or the link when it goes live, like setting up a practice of sending it to them and sending some helpful resources for them to share it. The third thing you mentioned was reviews. Getting reviews will help you rank higher or come up more organically in the search on different podcast apps. So one of the things that I had to learn the hard way when it comes to getting reviews is that, number one, you really have to teach people how to leave a written review on iTunes or on whatever platform they're listening to. It's really, people don't naturally get it. So I had to, I did a contest, and I said, if you leave a review, you will get my free blank. And it was a free gift from my coaching program that I knew my audience would probably want. And all they had to do was send a screenshot of the review they left and they would get the free gift. And that really helped drive up the reviews. I also had to give them the instructions to make it easy for them. And then the other thing to think about that you said is when you are picking guests, do have a little bit of a criteria that you guys share the same niche, or, that they are someone who you want to be associated with in your niche and industry. So I love those tips. And the other thing I want to ask you about when it comes to, just improving your podcast results is, how do you go about sharing? Sorry. One other note. Everybody can increase their podcast viewership or also their search engine optimization by having show notes that go with the podcast on their website or something like that, where you share the host, the guest's name, and you have a little blog that goes with the podcast. And that's another way to kind of organically get yourself out there in Google, that kind of thing. So, and then the last practice, just one more thing that I did last year, was I made a goal to kind of be on a podcast per week. And that was really, for a while, I did that. And that was really helpful because even though in the moment that it goes live, you're not going to see a huge change. I've had people who have heard me on a podcast a year ago and come to me and say, hey, I really liked that. And now I'm ready for marketing support, or now I'm ready for a business coach or whatever. So that's been really useful. And I think it's important to remember that podcasting is a long-term strategy where over time, it accumulates viewers, it accumulates trust, it accumulates you being found by your ideal client and them coming to you. But it's not something that immediately you're going to be like, oh my God, I posted one podcast and all these people checked me. So how do you stay patient, Omar, with that? And what are some ways that you talk about your podcast or get it out there on social media?
Yeah, no, I think that it's a long game. Like you said, it's something that, again, you have to be passionate about this. You want to do it. You definitely have to see that it's a part of a bigger strategy, and especially when you're doing this kind of thing. So it can get frustrating because you said it's not very, very immediate by any stretch of the imagination. But I could say definitely to the point that you were mentioning earlier. I mean, how many YouTube videos do you stumble upon that are 4 or 5 years old, and then all of a sudden you start watching what this person is doing, but you just happen to find them this weekend? It's one of those things that podcast has the same kind of thing, because some of the things that are maybe relevant for you at that point wasn't relevant, or you just didn't stumble upon it at the time. So you definitely get a residual following just by putting it out there and having content available online. So it's not something that by any stretch of the imagination is one and done, and we need to have a bunch of results at that time. It's that part. And just knowing that is just a lot easier to do that. You do have to have some enjoyment about this. And you were just talking about like the social media thing. I don't enjoy the social media thing whatsoever. I love this. This is something I love, having conversations with great people like yourself and really just getting into a conversation. So it's a lot easier for me to do it. And I know this is about podcasting, but this is something that you should pick any medium that you feel comfortable or enjoy it a little bit, because it is definitely something that you can't do this and begrudgingly kick yourself around because you don't want to do it. And it's one of those bad strategies because it takes time. It's not something like, again, a quick post on Instagram and may take 3 minutes of your time. There's a lot that goes into podcasting. And I'm sorry, I missed the second part of your question.
No, that's okay. I think what you just pointed out is a really good point, where you're focusing on what are your strengths and what you enjoy, and picking that as your platform to really go all in on. And one of the second half of my question was, how do you promote your podcast once it's out? Like, do you post about it on social media? Do you, what are some of the things you do?
Yeah, like I mentioned, that I'm pretty bad at the social media thing, honestly. I have a lot of subscribers and stuff like that, and I just definitely send my newsletter and so the people who subscribe to my mailing list. So that's the majority. I know this is a bad thing, and I need to actually, that's in this this next quarter, I'm actually getting that social media thing down and actually hiring someone to do it, because I cannot stand it. I mean, completely. So I know my downloads will be better. So that's one of the things that I'm focused on this quarter. It's all an evolution. So I definitely am moving in that direction next quarter. But again, like you mentioned, social media is fantastic for that. If you do that, you definitely put it out on your mailing list, and you just really, once you have the guests on, do their best to help promote and get it out there. But I think for the most part, like you said, getting the ratings and the reviews and making sure your show notes are good, and some people actually put the transcription on there. It makes the Google rankings go up. I think all those are little things that you can just do in the process of podcasting that'll get you found. And again, like just a nice title, something that's relatable to what the market that you're trying to get in front of, making it easy. Like I mentioned earlier, I have 2 podcasts. The other one's called This Podcast Burns Fat. It's a weight loss podcast. You're looking for weight loss, you're gonna find it. It's like title stuff, So and then just in consistency, as long as and I think everybody does it naturally. Once you stumble upon Hailey, Rowe, and you see the amount of podcasts you have, they automatically give you respect, because wow, you have staying power. You have all these episodes where you could sometimes pick a cool time when they got 4 episodes, and he's like, do I really want to commit to that podcast when they only have 4 episodes? That's actually one of the things that I tried to mention quick about when you start. If you launch, don't just launch with 1 episode. Have like 10 in the queue, so that if you're doing a weekly show, or 12 in the queue for the mathematical purposes, you have 3 months worth of content, and then just release it every week. And then it puts a lot less pressure on you to just search for a guest, if that's your format of your show and you're having guests and stuff like that. So it makes you feel a little bit better. And again, like it grows your actual content, where someone stumbles upon it and say, oh, well, this person's building, I can definitely get with that. It's almost like any show. You wouldn't necessarily watch a show if you only know that it's going to last a season. Like people are in the mindset where they want to grow with you. They want to learn more. And they don't want you to just get up and leave and get canceled like Netflix show. It's just like, what happened?
Yes, I love that. I that's such a good do's and don'ts kind of summary, because I was guilty at the beginning of doing 1 episode at a time, and I would be like, oh shoot, I have to edit this by next week, and that led to a lot of inconsistency in the first year of my podcast. And I'm glad I still started it, but it was it was a slow start, and start imperfectly. I would give that advice to our audience too, because sometimes people will say they want to have a podcast and they've been sitting on, 30 episodes for 2 years and they're afraid to launch it. So I would say do it, but at the same time, like Omar said, have a little bit of wiggle room.
Yeah, it takes the pressure off, because like you said, you don't want it to make it seem like, oh, I'm frantically just running out and trying to get any guests that you can find. Right. And then, that's the problem in itself as well.
Right. And I think one thing I want to share with the audience about some do's and don'ts, and maybe you have things to add to this, is first, as far as a do, get yourself out of editing your podcast and like out of the process of launching it and putting it up and doing the show notes and stuff as soon as humanly possible. If you can outsource that and you can just focus on, connecting with the guests, doing the interviews, you are going to love the podcasting process so much more. And that was really hard process for me to build. And I admit it's not perfect, but getting it off my plate was so huge. And we do a transcribe for the show notes now, usually. So that makes the show notes a lot easier. And then, we have a process for getting the bio and the photo from the guest, and a process for, where to post it when it goes live and all that stuff. So I think that's one of my biggest advice. That would be my biggest advice to people doing this, is you're going to drive yourself crazy if you're the editor, the host, the planner, all the things.
You are so right, because that's something that I had to get rid of. I mean, at one point I was like a year and a half behind in my show notes. So, because you don't want, it's like, this is the lion's share of like what you should be doing. Like you said, this is what you like to do. This is, your area of genius, and this is what you want to do. All that other stuff, again, not interested, like recapping it, doing it. And again, like, they have people who know how to do it great. The graphics, all that kind of stuff that go along with the show notes for itself, or even like getting, if you have someone who actually gets guests for you, all that stuff, it makes it easy. You just show up, do your thing, and it's done. Editing was a pain in the neck. I didn't want to do that at all. And I know these sound like cost, but once you start looking into how much it actually costs, it's really not a big expense, especially what it does for your podcast itself, and just having the opportunity to have a really professional product. It's definitely, that was great advice.
Thank you. Yes. And one of the things that I try to teach in my Zero to Hero Coach Inner Circle is we give a template for, how to pitch yourself to podcasts. And we have a PR expert talk about how to get on podcasts, and, things to make it a little easier to get media exposure. And one of the things that I like to always do is try to just make the systems or the templates or whatever easier for clients. And the last thing I want to point out before we end today's episode is, Omar, is there any other two things? First, I think one of the biggest takeaways you've shared today is that having a podcast can kind of teach you the character building skill and entrepreneurial skill you need of having patience, continuing to be consistent, even if you don't see immediate results, and being able to trust that it will pay off over time. Because like I said, I've had people listen to my podcast 2 years ago, and they finally, sign up as a client or whatever. So that's one of the hugest takeaways. Is there any other big do's or don'ts you would tell our listeners before we end today's episode?
I would like to spin back as far as like a do or don't, just like the mindset part of it, kind of you bringing up the Joe Rogan idea, because I had that conversation with my mentor. I'm like, I want to be like Joe Rogan. I want to talk about anything, and he was like, everyone thinks Joe Rogan or Oprah, that they just see them here. They don't remember Joe Rogan was doing Fear Factor, and he was a comedian, and then he was an analyst on MMA, and he has this body of work where he probably took 20,000 followers from each of those different things, and now he has say just over 1 million people right here. We're not there yet. We could get there. It's something that you have to master something first, and it might be weight loss, it might be this, that, and then it doesn't mean that you're pigeon-cooped into something for the rest of your life. You actually start expanding, and people, as they get to know you, they want your opinion on other things, and it kind of just naturally just grows. And then you could have a bigger audience and a bigger kind of diverse array of topics that you can discuss on a something that might be a couple of years down the road. But it is something where, I guess, don't get discouraged by the fact that you're thinking if you pick something now, that's the only thing you're going to be talking about for the rest of your life. It doesn't work like that. Even to the point of guest podcasts. I've been on podcasts that have nothing to do with health, nothing to do with wellness, and they just want to discuss the topic of the day. And that's something that, because you are well or known in a specific area, they want to hear what your opinion on something else is. It's just a natural, I think, human way of interacting. So I think if that was it, do or don't get discouraged by the idea that niching down is such a bad idea, especially when you're starting out, because it's not the end all be all to the rest of your life.
Right. Yes, I totally agree with you there. And thank you so much for sharing all of this awesome insights. And for our listeners, since we did talk about reviews today, if you do like the Health Coach Nation podcast and you want to give Omar on Health Coach Academy, if you want to send us both a little written review, we would very much appreciate it. And Omar, tell everybody where they can connect with you.
Yeah, my easiest way to get connected is omarcumberbatch.com, and then you can get to listen to the Health Coach Academy podcast there. You also can listen to this podcast, Birds Fat, which I host with Dr. Lori Shemick. It's obviously a weight loss show. We touch about all kinds of the diet fads. We call ourselves, well, at least me more specifically, we're like diet agnostic. We don't necessarily believe in one thing exclusively. We have all types of guests, from carnivores to plant-based diet guests. If it works for you, take it and run with it. We're very much just want to put information to get you a little healthier in that world out there. But yeah, omarcumberbatch.com is where I can be found, and connect to me on all the social media handles to that, and listen to any of the podcasts that I have.
We love that. Yes. And I love that your podcast covers it all, and they can take what's useful, discard what's not, and, make their own choices. And I think that's important in the world of information overload. And yes. So thank you so much for coming on the show, and we'll talk soon.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. Have a great day.
You too. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. And if you liked it and want to reserve your very own free sales audit, go to haileyrowe.com/strategy-call to book your very own free sales audit. On the call, we'll talk more about the common concerns you get from your ideal clients, how to overcome those concerns, how to coach through objections, how to change your mindset around sales, and improve your sales process so you can be closing and converting more clients. I can't wait to connect with you, and go to haileyrowe.com/strategy-call to take the first step. Thanks so much. Have a good day.